Welcome back to One Mind Syndicate. I am your host, Gersh1, and today we're going to be doing something a little different. We're going to be talking about the similarities between Game of Thrones and Warhammer 40k, specifically their origin story. It turns out that if we look at their origin story, it seems like one grew inspiration from the other, or at least took inspiration from some outside source that were similar. If you're new to the channel, subscribe because we post Warhammer 40k content every single day. And if you are a Game of Thrones watcher and you don't know what Warhammer 40k, I encourage you to subscribe because you're going to learn the lore of Warhammer 40k, and it's absolutely amazing. Far greater than Game of Thrones. Subscribe and you'll find out. But with that said, let's compare the origin stories of Game of Thrones and Warhammer 40k. The people of Westeros always speak of the legend of the Children of the Forest and the First Men, and this legend shares many similarities to the Warhammer 40k legend of the War in Heaven. But before we get into that, let's learn about the legend of Game of Thrones, starting with the Children of the Forest. The Children of the Forest are a mysterious, non-human race that were reportedly the original inhabitants of the continent of Westeros. They worshipped nature gods and countless and nameless spirits of every tree, every rock, and every stream. The Children of the Forest had a natural connection to magic. Their religion, devoted to the old gods of the forest, had no complex temples, but according to legend, it was the children that carved the faces into the sacred weirwood trees. These carved heart trees were the closest thing to a shrine in their religion, and these trees are still being discovered today. The Children of the Forest were already living in Westeros when the First Men migrated to the continent. The First Men are the original human inhabitants of Westeros. They ruled the continent for thousands of years before the Andals invaded from the eastern continent of Essos. 12,000 years ago, the First Men from the eastern continent of Essos migrated to Westeros by crossing a land bridge known as the Arm of Dorne. The First Men were cutting down the Children's Forest, including the sacred weirwood trees, leading them into conflict with the Children of the Forest. The two races fought a desperate series of wars for dominance for the next 2,000 years, leading to a standstill. The two races agreed to a peaceful coexistence and signed the Pact of the Isle of Faces and the God Eye Lake, granting the open lands to humanity and the forest to the children. The pact lasted for another 2,000 years before the enigmatic White Walkers invaded from the uttermost north, bringing death and destruction to both races. The White Walkers are an ancient race of humanoid ice creatures, born of powerful and untested magic. They were created to protect the Children of the Forest from the First Men, who had waged war on them ever since they had arrived from Essos. However, the White Walkers eventually broke free of the Children's control and became the most feared creatures in Westeros, posing a threat to anything living. The Children of the Forest allied with the First Men to drive back the White Walkers in the War for the Dawn 8,000 years ago. They defeated the White Walkers and drove them back into the frozen north. The Walkers faded into legend and are forgotten. After the defeat of the White Walkers, the children, much reduced in number, are said to have helped Bran the Builder raise the wall with their powerful magic to prevent the White Walkers' return. We can quickly draw comparisons to Warhammer 40k, as the Children of the Forest are very similar to the old ones of Warhammer 40k, and the First Men are very similar to the Necron tier race. To better understand this connection, let's talk about these two 40k races, starting with the old ones. The old ones were an ancient and technologically advanced intelligent race who established an interstellar empire across the Milky Way galaxy, tens of millions of standard years before the development of most other sentient species currently existing in the galaxy. In other words, they settled the galaxy just like the Children of the Forest. The old ones had a natural connection to the Immaterium. They did not worship the Immaterium like Chaos does today. They had a strong connection to the Warp. It was this strong connection to the Warp that allowed the old ones to be the first to create the Webway. The webway, also known as the labyrinthian dimension in older text, is an extra-dimensional space partitioned off from the immaterium. They created the webway as a conduit that allowed its masters to travel at will to countless far-flung worlds without risking the fickle tides of warp. Entrance to the webway was through webway portals, which are still being protected by the Eldar and discovered by man to this day. Now let's talk about the Necrontyr. The Necrontyr were a humanoid species that began their existence under a fearsome, scourging star in the far reaches of the galaxy, known as the Halo Star region. Assailed at every moment by ionizing solar winds and intense radiational storms, the flesh and blood Necrontyr became a morbid people whose precarious lifespans were riven by the constant loss. When the Necrontyr encountered the Old Ones, they had already established their dominion over the galaxy, while the Necrontyr were still struggling to maintain their existence as a spacefaring race. The Necrontyr lived very short lifespans compared to the Old Ones, and they lacked the ability to manipulate the immaterium like the Old Ones. All of this filled the Necrontyr people with anger and jealousy. The Necrontyr went to war with the Old Ones due to the Old Ones' superiority. This war became known as the War in Heaven. This war was brutal, but ultimately the Old Ones' control of the warp allowed them to get the upper hand and pacify the Necron race. Not satisfied with the outcome, the Necrontyr were forced to make an alliance with the godlike Catan, who in return for their flesh, blood, and soul, they would give the power of immortality and direction to defeat the Old Ones. The Necrontyr accepted the offer and were turned into the Necron race, a race of robotic skeletal warriors who came under the control of the Catan. Ultimately, the Necrons were able to defeat the Old Ones and drive them out of the Milky Way galaxy. But the Necrons were still enslaved. They finally broke their enslavement when they weakened the Catan and gained their independence. Unfortunately, the loss of their soul turned the entire race into undead robots bent on the destruction of all living things. The Necrons exiled themselves at the pinnacle of their existence, and they lay dormant underneath tomb worlds. This is where we can start to draw comparisons between the two origin stories of these worlds. Just like the children of the forest, the Old Ones are the original settlers of their world. They have advanced technology and share a natural connection to something special that the other races do not have. This special thing has two different names when looking at the two series, but they share almost identical traits: warp and magic. The warp is the same as magic. The children of the forest manipulate magic through sorcery, and the Old Ones manipulate the warp through psychic powers. By utilizing their natural talents, the Old Ones create the webway, and the children of the forest carve the weirwood trees, both of which are left behind to be used, worshipped, or destroyed by races that follow. The Necrontyr and the First Men are also very similar. They both are intruders to worlds, being people who start their civilization when another more powerful and advanced society already exists. They both lack the natural abilities that the existing cultures possess. In this case, the Necrontyrs cannot use the webway or psychic powers, and the First Men cannot use magic or sorcery to the same degree as the children of the forest. They both become angry at the existing culture. The Necrontyr grow jealous of the Old One's long lifespan, and the First Men become angry that they cannot cut down the weirwood trees because the children of the forest see them as sacred. This leads to tension, which leads to war in both stories. The wars are brutal, but this is where the story changes a bit. The children of the forest are the ones that are almost defeated by the First Men, whereas the Old Ones are the ones that almost defeat the Necrontyr. Either way, the losing parties turn to power that will eventually come back to hurt them. The children of the forest turn to dark magic to convert some of the First Men to White Walkers, and the Necrontyrs turn to the Catan to convert themselves into Necrons. This is where the similarities continue between the White Walkers and the Necrons. Both are commanded by a handful of individuals that still have a portion of their former selves intact. The Necrons are led by the Necron Overlord, headed by the Silent King, and the White Walkers are led by walkers, headed by the Night King. They both are made up of mostly undead hordes that are very difficult to destroy. The Necrons have the Necron warriors, the White Walkers have the Whites. The Whites can be chopped to pieces and still fight on, and the Necron warriors have reanimation protocols. Both races have a sinister desire to destroy everything that is living. The White Walkers are killing anything that's warm, and the Necrons kill anything that has flesh and blood. The creators of these two races ultimately get seriously hurt. The Necron tier are completely wiped out by the existence or the creation of the Necrons, and even the Necrons are only shells of their former selves, and slaves to the Catan. The White Walkers turn on the Children of the Forest, and their very own creation almost wipes them out. The outcome of this is different in both stories. The Necrons go on to defeat the Old Ones and drive them out of the galaxy, and the White Walkers are not so lucky, and are driven back by the alliance of the Children of the Forest and the First Men. But in the end, both the Necron and the White Walker race are pushed into exile, the Necrons self-exiling themselves. And in their respected current time, both races are waking up and returning to bring destruction to their former dominion. Their return is seen as terrible, and some even question if they ever existed. And those were the major similarities between the world of Game of Thrones and the world of Warhammer 40k. There's a lot more, and if you guys like these type of videos, tell me, and I'll make more of these connections between Warhammer 40k and maybe other stories. It doesn't necessarily have to be Game of Thrones, but even in the Game of Thrones worlds, there's more connections that can be made. So again, if you enjoyed this video, please share this with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, or any Warhammer 40k player that also watches Game of Thrones. By you guys sharing these videos and subscribing to the channel, it really helps out. And if you're completely new to everything that is Warhammer 40k, please subscribe, because we are a lore channel that is dedicated to putting out lore on this awesome world that is Warhammer 40k. But again, guys, thank you for everything, and don't forget to jump on over to Patreon. A simple $1 a month helps us create more videos. If you can't, simply by liking, commenting, and sharing, it really helps us out. And I'll see you tomorrow. This is Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.